In this video, you will learn how you can make any mono sound stereo without using stereo widening plugins, without using unison functions on your synthesizer. This technique I'm about to show you can enhance your productions and make them sound bigger and more immersive. It will allow you to turn something like this into something like this. My name is Philipp from Pick Yourself. I produce, mix and master music full-time in my Berlin-based studio. I do this for more than 15 years professionally, and this channel exists because I want to share some of the lessons that I've learned with you. And so if you're new to this channel, I have put together a little gift for you. It's called the Finisher Framework, my 3 simple steps that you can use to finish at least one great sounding song per month. I think this system is fantastic for everyone who wants to get more consistent with their productions. You can get this at pickyourself.com/framework. The link is in the description. Go grab it. It's free and it's an awesome resource for you to get faster with productions. So first of all, we have to get back to the basics and understand what mono and stereo even means. We need to make one thing clear first of all. Mono and stereo, this is a psychoacoustic phenomenon. So our brain is being tricked into thinking that something is mono or something is stereo. This is the way all of this works. Let me give you an example. So you're sitting in front of your studio speakers and you're listening to something in mono. This just means that the left speaker and the right speaker are producing exactly the same signal at the same time with the exact same phase relationship, and the movement of the speakers is 100% the same on the left and the right side. So your brain thinks that there is a so-called phantom center in front of you. So you're listening to something in mono and you think it's coming straight out of the center between you, but there's no speaker in the center between your speakers. If you are listening to something in stereo, it means that the left and the right speaker are producing a different signal at a slightly different time with a different phase response, and your brain is identifying this as things being panned in a stereo panorama. All of this is a psychoacoustic trick that gives you this feeling of stuff being wide and immersive. Once we understand this concept, we know exactly what we need to do to a mono source to make it stereo. But first, I'm going to show you what doesn't work and why. Right now, you think the sound is coming from the center. This is because the left and the right channel are producing the exact same signal. Now, what a lot of newbie producers do is they try to duplicate this track and then pan it left and right and think that this is going to give them a stereo sound. Let's try it out and I will tell you why this doesn't work. So if you duplicate any signal and you pan one version to the left and one version to the right, you are still feeding both speakers the exact same information at the same time with the same phase response, which is why everything ends up being in the center again. Now, those of you with sharp critical listening skills will have noticed that this is not sounding entirely mono. Let me compare this for you. Can you notice a slight difference? It's not only a volume difference, because of course both of these sound waves are amplifying each other because they're summed together, but also there is a slight deviation from the left to the right signal, which makes it sound a tiny bit stereo-ish. And the reason for that is because the modulation in the synth is a little bit random. So the starting off points of the oscillators are slightly different. The modulation points where the LFO modulates the sound source is slightly different. And so this little bit of variation already helps spread out the stereo signal a tiny bit. Now, to prove my point, here is a sine wave that I've just loaded into the session. One of them is panned left, one of them is panned right. But it still sounds completely centered because here the information from left and right is exactly the same. All right, now I'm going to show you how you can really turn something mono into something that sounds stereo step by step. And if you get any value out of this video so far, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. This shows me that I'm on the right track and that you want more videos like this one. All right, so I have now muted our mono synth and I've created a group for our synth mono left and right, the one that are panned, hard left, hard right, what we just did before. And now let's think about how we can turn this into something that sounds more stereo. Well, if you want to give the speakers different information so that they move slightly differently and create this stereo panorama, one of the things you can do is just detune the source material a tiny bit. So this is our left synth, and we're going to detune the first oscillator a few cents, the second oscillator also a few cents, a little bit differently also. We'll go to the right one and do the exact opposite. So we detune slightly higher, and here also detune it slightly higher. Now let's listen to this. Now this starts to sound much more stereo, but there's much more we can do. For example, we can talk about the waveforms that we're using here. So on the right oscillator, I will choose a slightly different position on this wavetable. So something around here. On the left one, we will keep it the same, but maybe change the second oscillator a tiny bit. And the cool thing is that you can be playful with this. You can decide on what exact part of the wavetable you want to play. Let's check this out here. And this way you can find a sweet spot where it sounds most stereo, so to speak. Changing the waveform is obviously only possible with a synthesizer, but the detune you can still do with audio samples. You just go into the sample editor and detune them slightly to get the same effect. So this is sounding quite nice, but there's more we can do. For example, we can talk about the time domain. So right now we've messed with the phase relationship and the harmonic content a tiny bit. If we now introduce a slight delay to one of the channels, this will make it sound even wider. So here we have our delay, and I only delay one channel. You could also do it with the track delay inside Ableton, but I'm just going to show this with a plugin here. You have to deactivate a couple of settings here. So you have to deactivate the filter because you don't want to filter one of them. I go to 100% wet, so I'm delaying the complete channel, and I'm not syncing it to the grid. I'm actually dialing in something that's called Haas delay, H-A-A-S. So Haas delay is a delay that's around 21 milliseconds. And the trick is here that you're using a psychoacoustic phenomenon that our ears cannot really tell that something is delayed by something like 20, 21 milliseconds, but it still provides enough sonic separation that we somehow get this perception of depth from it. It's a very interesting concept. I suggest you read up on this if you don't know about it yet. And you can see what sounds good. Let's try out 21 milliseconds. So this would be a long delay. Now this is sounding super wide now. It's very interesting. Maybe if this sounds too wide for what you're trying to achieve, you can then bring it back a little bit and dial in something that sounds a bit more narrow here with the panning. Just for the fun of it, I'm going to leave this at maximum width, so I'm trying to make this as wide as possible. Next up, we can change the harmonics of one of the sides from the other. We can do this by introducing a little bit of saturation. Let me show you. So I'm adding a saturator to the other channel. It really doesn't matter which one you use, but make sure to only use it on one side. And I'm going to use something like the medium curve here and just dial in a little bit of a different setting. And once again, we get more separation between the two channels. You can then EQ both of those channels individually in slightly different ways. So any EQ will work. You can just use the stock EQ from Ableton. It really doesn't matter. So we'll use the EQ8 here. And the side with the saturator, I will boost a tiny bit on the top end and maybe some extra high mids, but a little bit less on the bottom here. Okay, the other one, and we will do the exact opposite. Boost the low end a little bit more low mid-range, but less high end. And by the way, if one side starts to sound louder than the other one, the problem is that our psychoacoustic deciphering of the signal will lean towards that side. So you have to always make sure to compensate for the differences and just make sure that you end up with something that sounds stereo but not leaning too much to one side, except you want that. And finally, here's a little pro trick for you. You can then go to the group where both of these tracks are grouped together to one stereo group. And you can compress this a little bit. So for example, use the glue compressor and dial in something where you let a little bit of the transients poke through. So medium attack time, fast-ish release time, gentle ratio 2:1, and then So this lets it sound a slightly bit more cohesive. I'm not sure if you can hear it on your headphones or on your speakers, but to me this provides a little bit of that glue, and it sounds like one channel, one stereo channel, instead of two things that are completely separated. And the last step here is to recontextualize those two sounds by putting them into one space again. Now this sounds abstract. What do I mean? I basically mean use a reverb and put those two sources into the same room and dial in something that lets them sound even more cohesive. So let's do that. So I'm using a algorithmic stereo reverb by Softube. It's called the TSAR, and I will dial in a medium-sized room with some more early reflections. And by the way, I'm going to do a deep dive on reverb settings quite soon, so make sure to stay tuned, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. I will make the space slightly smaller and not as much high end in here. So I will cut the highs a little bit, but make the reverb sound quite dense. Now it's 100% wet, sounds like this. Let's bring it down. And so what this does is it gives our brain the psychoacoustic cues that those two sounds live in the same space, the very left and very right panned one. Now this is very cool. Let's listen to this in context with the music. So I will play the groove for you and then reintroduce this synth. And my final trick here is something that I've already mentioned in my video on how to make white synths still work in mono. But what I'm essentially doing here is I'm reintroducing some of the center portion of the signal again. And you can do this by simply using the original channel that you have. This is why I kept this mono synth from before. So I will unmute this and I will just slightly fade this in to taste. And now you have your super wide sounding immersive lead sound that still works in mono because you have this center channel that provides a little bit of stability. So that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Before you leave, make sure to leave a comment below and let me know if you have any follow-up questions whatsoever. I'm happy to answer them in the comments. I'm really active in there. Also, if there's anything you would like to add to this video, then please share it with everyone. Let's all grow together, and I will see you in the next video.